The NFF had reached out, and I told our president here at the time, absolutely, I would be interested. I didn't hear anything after that phone call about taking the job. A month later, my phone is literally just blowing up with people congratulating me. And I saw on my phone on the social media where I was the new coach of the Super Falcons. But I had never spoken to anybody from the Federation. There were times with the Federation that I wasn't paid for 14 months. Well, I would have lost my home. It's going to be very difficult to continue winning if the Federation doesn't start to support things better. Other African countries are starting to invest more and put more into it. And eventually it's going to catch up. Too many people just think it's going to happen because you're Nigeria. It's not that way anymore. I just think this team could be a top 10 team in the world. I really do.
From your point of view now, watching the team, do you think we can win the WAFCON?
I would say it this way.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be watching or listening to us from. This is the home of Nigerian football podcast. As always, I'm your host, AyoT, and I have with me once again a special guest. But this time it's a little bit different. I don't have a football player with me. I have a man who has coached football at different levels, from college to professional club football, and of course, the Nigerian women's national team, the Super Falcons. I have with me Coach Randy Waldrum. Coach Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for accepting to do this. I'm really excited to talk to you, and hopefully we get to learn a lot about you and about your time working in and with the Nigerian national team.
Sure.
But before we get into the talk about football, I always like to ask my guests, on a personal level, how are you? How is life? Because those are the things that are more important than the football.
Sure. Well, everything now is going well. I appreciate you asking. Some of you may remember when I returned from the Olympics. 2 days after returning from the Olympics, my wife had a heart surgery. She had four blocked arteries, so they had to go in and do open heart surgery, and uh, that went well. She got home for, I believe, 10 days, and then an infection set in to the wound. So they had to go back and open her up again. And she was open for 21 days while they were fighting this infection. So she went through a really difficult time. And it's about that time, I stepped down in September from the Super Falcons, really based on all of that, needing to take care of her and make sure everything was set with her. But thank you for asking. She's doing very well now. She's got her strength back, and God's been good. It's we've been blessed that all of that went fine. So I appreciate you asking about it.
And I'm glad to hear that everything's fine now. I'm really glad to hear
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some talk about you. Can you tell us a little bit, who is Randy Waldrum, and how did you get into football?
Well, I grew up playing. Now, again, like, as passionate as Nigeria is about their football. Back when I was a young child in the U.S., it wasn't like that in the U.S. The major sports were American football and baseball or basketball. But when I was 12, we had a Swedish gentleman move to my hometown, and he started a football, or a soccer program for us kids. So I started late in my life, at 12 playing football, but I played and went on and played in college and played professionally. Um, so I knew I wanted to stay in the game after the playing days were over. So I worked really hard on my coaching badges, my license and so forth. So I've been coaching now over 30 years, as you mentioned it, at all levels. I've coached at the high school level. I've coached at the youth level, the university level. Obviously, I've spent a lot of time there. But I've been fortunate to have some doors open to coach not only professionally, but with some national teams. I took Trinidad and Tobago during the 2014 qualifying campaign for the 2015 World Cup. We, some of your viewers and listeners may not know this, but we were the last team eliminated. We had made it all the way through CONCACAF and into the play-in game, and we had to play a home and away against Ecuador. And we drew away at Ecuador and returned at home. And it was one of those nights where we hit the post 3 times, and in the 92nd minute, they score off a free kick to win it and to advance. So we just missed it from Trinidad. But I've also coached our U.S., our U23 teams. I've been involved in camps with our senior team as an assistant, and so I've been fortunate to have a lot of experience at that level. And it's a level that I really love, is the international level. And then when the opportunity came to coach Nigeria, obviously I was super excited to take on the project. And I just think you have so much potential in your country of doing great things on both the men and women's side. And my hope was, when I took the job, is that I could bring um, some new ideas, some new thought processes, from, especially with our women being the best in the world here in the U.S. and my experiences there. I thought I could bring some of the organizational ideas, the long-term planning. I had developed a 10-year plan for Nigeria for youth football and how it would translate into winning a World Cup within the next 10 years. Um, and I'd hoped I could influence it that way, because I knew you had great players. It would, you've always had the talent, you've always had the players. I have felt what was lacking is that organization. And so that's why I really took the project on. And listen, I loved my 4 years there. Had a lot of difficult times, as you well know, but we had a lot of great success. And so I love my time there in Nigeria.
Amazing, amazing. And I mean, I read online that you had initially been offered the role in 2017, but you turned it down at the time.
Yes.
So why did you turn it down at the time?
Well, I tell you, to be quite frankly, what happened with it is I was between jobs at the time. I had left the Houston Dash, the professional team here,
Yeah.
and was trying to decide what my next move was going to be. And at the time, President Pinnock, was the president of the NFF, and the NFF had reached out and through U.S. Soccer, through our president, to see if I was interested. And I told our president here at the time was Sunil Galati, and he had called me asking me if I would be interested. And I told him absolutely I would be interested. And this was around September of that year. And quite frankly, just so I didn't hear anything after that phone call from U.S. Soccer about taking the job. And about a month later, my phone is literally just blowing up with people congratulating me. And it was people all over the world, friends and things. And I saw on my phone on the social media where I was the new coach of the Super Falcons, but I had never spoken to President Pinnock or anybody from the Federation. So for the next, through maybe November, from September to November, I was trying to reach somebody from the Federation to say, if I'm actually your coach, we probably need to discuss a contract and, the terms and all of that. And I never got a response. So that's the time the University of Pittsburgh came for me, around November. So since I hadn't heard from the Federation and couldn't get a response, I went ahead and accepted the job at Pittsburgh. And then I called again to President Pinnock and let him know, since I hadn't heard anything, I was going to take this job. And I actually, excuse me, I actually got a hold of him then. And he was like, no, no, we're set for you. We have a place for you here in Nigeria. Everything's set, take. And I said, I'm sorry, it's too late. I've already signed an agreement with the university. So that's how that kind of came about and how that opportunity was missed. And of course, you guys brought on Thomas Dinnerby, and he did a great job for you through the World Cup there in 2019. And then when he left during the Olympic run, I guess the qualifications for the Olympic is when he left, is when the Federation called back to see if I'd be interested in. And I said, yes, again, I would be, but I could only do it in keeping the job at Pittsburgh. I was very uncertain from the first go around of what happened, that it really was going to happen, and so that's how it all got started, and how it came about for the second time.
And that was something that really struck us as new because we had never heard of a coach signing with the national team but still having a job somewhere else. And
Right,
it did strike some people the wrong way. Some people felt like, well, he's not fully committed to us.
right,
You know, when you saw that everything was serious with the NFF this time around, they actually had a job for you this time. Um,
right.
did you feel like, well, you still couldn't leave Pittsburgh, or why was it that you still had to do both jobs?
Well, I think there was two things at the time, if you remember, is one was because of what happened the first time around, and again, I also read in the media. I knew all of the stories of your men's coach and previous coaches and not getting paid and not getting paid on time, and that kind of thing. And it's a little different here, I think, in the US maybe than Nigeria. I'm not sure. But here in the US, if you don't, every month you have a car payment, you have a house payment, you have bills to pay. And here in the US, if you don't pay those bills, you lose your home, after a few months. And so I was a little reluctant, being worried that I would be paid on time and leaving that, plus medical insurance and that kind of thing. So from a personal standpoint, that was a concern. And it probably, if I'm being honest, and this is no disrespect to the Federation, but it probably was the best thing, because there were times with the Federation that I wasn't paid for 14 months. Well, I would have lost my home, here. I would have lost my car here. So I needed it for that security. Now I was willing to step down, if I got there and everything worked the way it should have worked with payments and all of that, I would have been happy to have left Pittsburgh, to take Nigeria. But I also think what happened was it probably worked out for the Federation as well, because if you remember, that was right when COVID hit.
Right.
And so, from a financial standpoint, the Federation obviously didn't have to pay me a full time wage, which you would normally have to pay a national team coach. So, I think with the personal situation and then with COVID, I think it was just a marriage of two things that kind of happened that nobody expected, that hit at the same time. But I knew, now a lot of people in my Nigeria may not have known it, but my son was my assistant. So I knew I could leave Pittsburgh and fully commit to what I needed to do with Nigeria, even keeping that job, because he was running things back at Pittsburgh. And that's in effect what happened. I never, I feel very confident in telling you I never um, downplayed Nigeria. It was never second to Pittsburgh. Um, Over the 4 years, I've fully committed my time and energies to helping the team succeed, qualify for a World Cup, and be successful, and then to qualify for Olympics. I mean, it's the amount of time that we put in. I think everybody would agree that it even though it was kind of quote part time, it really was a full time job.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I kind of looked at it as two full-time jobs,
right,
but a lot of people just felt like, why would he be double dipping? And
sure,
I'm glad that you've been able to clear that up for us now.
yes,
But
absolutely.
let me also ask you, coaching the Houston Dash, coaching the youth teams, coaching Trinidad and Tobago, how did all that prepare you for coaching Nigeria? Because Nigeria comes with its unique sets of challenges and also good things that are unique about Nigeria, but it's very different. So how did that help you?
Yeah, I think obviously anytime you coach at the next level, at a higher level in a pro game, the pro game is so different than the university game here, not only in the ability of the players, but just the expectations, uh, the tactical ability to um, learn more tactically, how to cope with situations um, that you don't cope with a youth team or with a university team. So I think My time with the Dash um, really helped prepare me dealing with high level players because on that team, I had players like Carly Lloyd. I had Rachel Daly that plays the English international. So we had a few of the Brazilians, Rafaela, that we played against in the Olympics. She plays with Orlando now. So I had some really top talent, and learning how to manage and deal with that was a huge benefit with my time with the Dash. I think my time with all the different national teams help prepare you for the international game, because what happens is the international coaching is much different than club, than a pro club anywhere around the world, because with the international windows, you don't have the training time that you have with a club team. With your club team, you're with them every day, and you're with them every day for 10 months, right? So you've got time to organize a game model and a style and a way you want to play. You have time to work with the players individually. You're playing a game a week, so your periodization plan is very consistent. Whereas with a national team, you just have these little 10-day windows throughout, the calendar year. And usually what a lot of people don't understand is if you play two matches in that 10-day window, then you've really only got about 3 days of training, because you have two match days, which takes you down to 8 days in the window. And then you have two match day minus ones, or the days before the game, where you're very light because you got to get ready for the game. You can't overwork them. So that takes 2 more days out. So now you're down to 6 days. And then you have 2 days of recovery after the games, after both games. So you're really down to 3 or 4 days. And so it takes, I think, a very unique coach and a very experienced coach to be able to handle those windows. So it's quite different. So working with our U23s, working with Trinidad and Tobago, it really prepared me. But I would tell you what I think prepared me the most, which was very similar, was probably Trinidad and Tobago in the qualifying round, because a lot of the financial difficulties that we had at times with Nigeria, we had equally as much, if not more, with Trinidad. I can remember Trinidad sending the team over to the U.S. for the CONCACAF qualifiers, for the World Cup qualifiers, and they only arrived a week before the qualifiers began, and we opened with the U.S. As our first match. So we had a week to prepare, and I can remember only 12 players came. I can remember they had one bag of footballs, which were eight old raggedy footballs. We didn't have anything in our medical kit that was sent with us. And they didn't send a manager. They didn't send an administrator. They just sent the 12 players. And the players arrived with no money. So I'm in a panic because I have a week to prepare them with no money, because CONCACAF doesn't start paying their hotels and their meals until the tournament begins. So I had about a week to 10 days that I had to figure out how I'm going to feed this team 3 meals a day. How am I going to get transportation? How am I going to pay for the hotels? And so those kind of experiences certainly prepared me for some of the experiences we had in Nigeria. Although Nigeria certainly was a little better prepared than that. But I mean, I can sit here for hours and share stories with you on some of the things we faced in Nigeria as well. So I think that really prepared me, because I think, coming from the U.S., where our teams have everything they need. Even when they fly first class. The U.S. and the top clubs, England and the Dutch team and the French team and, Spain, they have everything that you could ask for to be the best in the world. And but not every country has that. So it's not only Nigeria that has those problems. There's other countries around the world that face similar problems with women's football, and in general, sometimes even with the men's teams. And I know you guys have had your share of some issues even with the Eagles. So I get it. But I think that really prepared me for what I was facing in Nigeria. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, I feel like nothing can prepare you for a situation like that other than previous experience. So, in a tricky way, it was kind of good that you had gone through something tougher, and then you were
That's
able
right.
to adapt and deal with the challenges that came with Nigeria. But
Absolutely.
let me ask you, landing in Nigeria, new head coach of the Super Falcons, what were your first impressions?
Well, my first impression was, when I first got there, the first thing that happened when I got there was we played an event in Turkey, in the tournament in Turkey. So I met the team and some Dr. Sanusi and some of the administration there in Turkey. And I knew we weren't going to have all the resources, that the U.S. has. But that first event went really well. We won all three games there in Turkey. Um, Working there and getting to know Dr. Sanusi and the staff and all of that, it went really well. The thing that probably impressed me the most was even though we didn't have what ultimately ended up being our full squad, that we took to the World Cup, but we had a handful of those players. And I was really impressed with the level of the talent, of the players. And it was kind of what I had expected because I had followed Nigeria for years before I took the job. When Sam Opudu had the team, here he's stationed here in the U.S., but when he had them back in '99, I followed them through the World Cup here in '99 and loved the talent. And so I expected the talent to be good, but when I actually got there and saw it firsthand, I was quite happy with the talent. And then there was some new young talent, that we brought in, like Tosin, that was her first senior call up and seeing her and her potential and the ability. And of course it was the first time I already knew Tony Payne because of her playing here in the US. Um, but it was her first camp, but I got to see Asisat for the first time. I knew about her and I'd seen her in the World Cups and the Youth World Cups even, but seeing her firsthand, I could see the power and the explosiveness and the strength and the talent that she possessed. We had uh, Halamatu was in that particular camp, and to see how tactically intelligent she was as a player, not only gifted in talent, but just understanding the game and where she is as a player on that. So there was quite a few of the players that we had, and then we had some young ones, like I said, that we had brought in for the first time. So my first impression really was very positive.
Amazing. I'm glad to hear that. And I mean, one of the things that I also noticed, or most Nigerians noticed during your time, was like you mentioned, there was an influx of new players into the team during your time,
Right,
including many of the players that were born and raised in the USA. You
right,
mentioned Tony Payne. You also brought in Michelle, you brought in Esther, you brought in Ife Onumono as well. Deborah Abiodun was also a new call of under your
right.
leadership. So my question would be, how do you go about convincing or approaching them and getting them to join the team?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. And let me start just by saying this: there's an awful lot of talent in the domestic players in Nigeria. The league, there's a lot of really good talent going through your league right now. So I understand the Nigerians that feel like you should only take the homegrown players. There's some that love the fact we brought players in from the outside, and then there's others that didn't like it. They felt like we should always bring the homegrown. But I think what happened is with some of the homegrown, we found some young players like Imran, Rofiat Imran. I went to Nigeria and saw her playing, and Celine Ota, and a couple of the other young players that we'd brought into a few camps. And Tosin was one of those as well that I saw in the Super Six early on in my tenure. And so we did want to look at those players. And in fact, the first year I was there, I think in the summertime, we had brought in about 40 players, local players, into a camp, and that's all we brought in. We didn't bring Asisat, or we didn't bring OC or any of the foreign based players. And what I saw pretty early on was a lot of potential talent, but I felt like that that year coming up was the qualification for the World Cup, and I
Right.
felt like those young players would need some time before they're ready to play against teams like the U.S. or teams like England, or the teams we faced, Australia. I knew they could do a job in some of the games, but I felt like at that highest level on the world stage, they might not quite be ready. So the ones that we felt were ready, like a Tosin, we brought in Deborah. When I saw Deborah with the U20s, I knew right away she can play at this level. She's ready. And so it wasn't that I was ever against bringing in the local domestic players, because I never was. I always feel like that should be the base, like that you should always draw from that group. um but since I had a very short window of time to get ready for the World Cup and the Cup of Nations, which was the qualifier, um we opted to go with some others. And then, as you mentioned, Michelle and some of the US based players, what really happened there is we had a camp in Houston, Texas, where we played in the summertime. It was the summer series.
Yeah.
And what happened is we had called some more of the uh, local players, some players I had been using, along with some players like OC and Asisat, and those players that were playing abroad that obviously were going to make up the core of your team. But when we got to Houston, we only had, I think, 11 or 12 players. For whatever reason, visas, whether the federation started too late in getting this organized, or whether the countries that they were trying to get visas in, they couldn't get in time. But five or six of our players didn't arrive because they couldn't get visas on time. And again, remember, this was still around COVID, right?
Right.
Um, so what happened, it's quite ironic, the way I ran into Iffy and Michelle and those type players was when we got into Houston, into the US, then I'm panicked because we're playing, I think we played Jamaica, Portugal, and the
And the
US
US. Yeah.
and the US. So I said, we can't make it through 3 games with 12 players. Like we can't do it. So through my connections here in the US, I started, while we were in camp, calling people and saying, do you have any Nigerian players in your club, and quite frankly, that's why those players got the opportunity. Otherwise, they may not have gotten it. It may have been later down the road before I connected. But um, I knew Mexico, for example. I know Mexico well, and I knew years ago when they started really putting an emphasis in their women's program, and they wanted to become competitive on the world stage. They didn't have enough talent in their leagues in Mexico to do it, right? So they really hit the US hard, and other places in Europe hard, to find any Mexican players with heritage. And that's why Mexico made this really quick jump from, once they really started their women's program, to becoming kind of a major player in CONCACAF and a credible team throughout the world. So I had always thought we should always look for those players, but I was kind of forced to look quicker than I wanted because we didn't have the talent. And luckily, those two of those players, Esther and Michelle, were playing in Houston for the Dash, and they were just reserve players. They weren't even under contract. They were just training with the Dash. But their coach let me know, hey, take a look at these two. They would be two good ones. I had remembered Iffy from playing at the university out in California. So I didn't know where she was at the time, but through her college coach, I tracked her down and found out, what was going on with her, and we got her in. So that's kind of how some of these foreign-based players came about for us. Ashley Plumpter was playing out in California as well, and then when I found out she actually had Nigerian heritage, then we jumped all over it, and it took us about 6 or 7 months before we got her affiliation changed from England to
Oh,
Nigeria. And so that one was a little bit longer process because she didn't have a Nigerian passport, at the time. But that's kind of how that all came about. And of course, those players all ended up being great for us and ended up playing a big role for us, through our qualification and the World Cup.
until today. Like, it's funny how it worked out because they're all key parts of the squad today.
They
Um,
are. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no, so
Very, very good pieces. And like I said, Tony was an easy one because I knew her. We actually tried to recruit her to my university. So I knew her for years, even when she was a young 16, 17-year-old player. So that was an easy one to bring in. But the other three were because we were shorthanded and I had to scramble and find some players. And they came in and did great and continue to do well, like you said, for the team.
uh, amazing. And I remember that because I interviewed Esther in the past. We had a conversation, and she said at the time she felt like she was coming in through the window, not even the back door of, of the
That's right.
team. You
That's
know,
right.
getting into camp and she's seeing these players that she had been
Yeah.
watching playing professionally and but
Yeah.
eventually she was able to adapt and then now
Yeah.
everything's going well
But you know
for
what
her.
it is too? It's a great example for young players to just always be ready, be as prepared as
Right.
you can because when the opportunity comes, you never know what may happen. And those three kids, they got an opportunity to fly into Houston to help us, and they took full advantage of it. It was so funny. Because I can remember stepping on the field. The first game down there was against Jamaica, and literally our players, because those three didn't come in till like the day before the game, that we played the match. And I can remember the players were introducing themselves to each other on the field before the game. Now what's your name again? Okay, Iffy. Okay, my name's OC. Kind of thing. So, considering that we threw it all together, they had a pretty good showing. But I think, like I said, they took full advantage of an opportunity that was presented for them, and I think it's a great lesson for young players.
Right, amazing. That's an amazing story. Okay, I want to talk to you about some of the tournaments that you took the team to, but
Mhm.
before we get into that, let's play a quick game, something to make us smile a little bit.
All right.
I want to ask you about Nigeria and what you might have learned while you were the coach of Nigeria. So, do you have a favorite Nigerian expression or saying, something that you picked up while you were coach?
No, I don't know that I have an expression. I would say that's a favorite, but what my backroom staff, the doctors and the managers and the equipment manager, they used to tell me all the time. I guess when you're stressed and not relaxed, it's like, just the hand signals on the chest, like calm down, it's okay, kind of thing. So that kind of got to be a running joke, when I'd be on the sidelines and things were stressful, I'd turn around and they just go, yeah, calm down. So yeah, no, I don't know that there was really an expression that I would say that I ended up using as a favorite. Um, but definitely, definitely with that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. How about, did you pick up any pigeon slangs? You know,
Oh man, it was so hard. I mean, I would be talking with the player individually, and then two or three other players would walk up and they would start in pidgin. I couldn't understand. It was like a foreign language, you know. I think Coach Ann taught me a few words, but I couldn't remember them now. And but yeah, it was definitely a completely different language for sure.
okay. How about the music? Because I mean, in the locker room, they're playing music. Did you pick up any favorite artists, favorite songs?
Yeah, I don't really know that I know the artist, but there were obviously several of the songs that they played that I loved. It was kind of similar to when I was in Trinidad. They had the soca music in Trinidad, and obviously the girls are always playing music in the locker room, on the bus, and everything else. And I really liked the music. Yeah, I loved it, and but I don't know that I could tell you an artist in particular. I listen. I'm a football guy through and through, and that's what occupies my time 24/7. So I can tell you what I like and hear, but I couldn't tell you who the
Oh,
artists were.
okay. How about the food?
Yeah, I had a hard time with the food. The manager would always have to get the chef at the hotel to cook me something a little bit different. I there wasn't any that I the breakfast, I like the breakfast a lot, that we would always have, but that's pretty safe when you have eggs and you know bread and some kind of uh, sausage links or whatever. That's pretty standard around the world, so
Yeah.
I can handle that. But I never really took to any particular dish that I found that I really,
Not even jollof rice.
yeah, not really. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
I really didn't. Yeah, it was just something that it's completely different, from the food here. Yeah, for
Yeah, I
sure.
mean, for sure it is different. I know
Yeah,
that for sure.
yeah.
Okay, how about what's your favorite Nigerian city of all the cities that you visited while you were coach?
Well, I wasn't really in that many cities in Nigeria because most of the things we had were held outside. There were parts of Lagos that I really liked because it's such a big city and you see all of the big buildings and the river. I guess is the river that goes through there and some of that part of. So there was some really parts of it that intrigued me. I would have liked to have seen more
Oh.
the times I was there. Now, I didn't like the traffic and the people drove crazy. I mean, here in the U.S., our highways and our roads have the white lines that separate the lanes. There, you just drive anywhere and any direction you want, and I found that to be, really like crazy. But to go 20 minutes, it would take you an hour, in Lagos sometimes with the traffic. So I didn't like that part of it, but there were parts of the city that I liked. But I enjoyed my time when we would go into camp in Abuja. That's probably, I would have preferred to be in Abuja for camp other than Lagos, just because it's not as many people. It's a little slower, more
Yeah.
calm. You can get around a lot easier. So yeah, Abuja probably would have been my favorite.
No, I mean, Abuja is definitely more of like a calm, quiet city, and Lagos is just hustle and bustle. Everything is
Yes,
going. Like,
exactly,
I grew up
exactly.
in Lagos, so I know exactly what it's like there.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I try to explain it to people, and they don't get it. New York City is crazy here in the U.S., but Lagos is even bigger than that. I mean, it's crazier than New York City, and like I said, the way you just the way you drive and it was crazy to me. Yeah.
Speaking of the driving, I usually joke with people because now I live here in Canada, and
Uh-huh.
I joke with people. I'm like, I grew up driving in Lagos. Trust me, I can drive here easily.
Yes.
Here
Easy.
everyone actually like drives normal and
Right.
is obeying all the traffic rules and
Right.
everything. I'm like in
Yeah.
Lagos, it's it's
Oh,
like it's a sport.
yeah. It's a sport. You're right, and that's what I would say to the manager. Say you don't see any police stopping anybody and giving them a traffic, citation or a ticket. And she goes, no, no, they don't. They leave the people alone. And yeah, it's crazy. It's unbelievable.
Okay,
Yeah.
final question on Nigeria before we get into tournaments. Of all the traditions that you saw that exist, maybe the singing,
Hmm.
entering the stadiums, or we're always praying in Nigeria,
Right.
all the other things that happen. What would you say was your favorite tradition that you felt like was a really good one?
Yeah, the two things that really gave me goosebumps, it really gave me chills was getting off the bus going into the stadium, the way they sing and dance going into the locker room beforehand. That's you don't see that in the US, you won't see that in Canada, with the teams in Canada. It's something special for the African teams, and of course Nigeria has their songs that they sing, and every time I would always film it every time,
Oh,
even though I knew what was coming. It gave me chills to see them enter the stadium, and I think that's something that's people think of when they think of Nigeria. Is that's a part of what they think of with the Super Falcons, and then the other thing I loved the faith that the players have. So the prayers and the singing even before a meal, was is really special, and that's in the quietness and the sanctity of the team. Not outside people don't see that, but I loved that aspect of it too. I thought that was really special, and I think it puts in perspective that we're fortunate to be playing football and being part of something like this, and because there's a lot worse things going on in the world. So it always kind of brought me back to a sense of peace
Right.
and appreciation. Yeah,
Amazing. And I remember like when I spoke with Ashley, that was one of the things that she also said. I remember she said there was a time she was on the bus driving to the game and the players were singing and she's like, she just started crying
yeah,
because it
yeah,
just overwhelmed her with emotion. Like, wow,
yeah,
it's so different from
yeah.
what she was used to.
No,
Amazing.
it definitely special.
Oh, amazing. Love to hear that. Okay, let's now talk about tournaments. So the first tournament that you took the team to was the WAFCON,
Hmm.
WAFCON 2021, but this was played in 2022.
Right.
So how did you feel heading into that tournament, knowing that Nigerians always want to win?
Yeah.
That's what we expect. How did you feel going into the tournament?
Well, I felt going into it there were still a lot of unanswered questions about our team, and the player selection, because up until that point, I think we had had just a few camps and training. We hadn't really had what I felt like was a training camp where you can come in and just train and try to implement your way of playing. We only had one of those. We went to Austria and had one 10-day camp in Austria that we just trained. And I think we played one friendly against a club team there, a pro team there. So that was the only time that I felt like we really could train the team the way we wanted. But I think also through the first three or four camps that we had, we were the players were always changing, because we were going through COVID and still kind of on the back end of COVID at that time. And so we weren't always ever able to get the core of the team together in any camp.
Right.
Halimatu was playing in Sweden. You couldn't hardly get the players out of Sweden. Desire was in China. You couldn't get in and out of China because of COVID. And examples like that throughout were, I just felt going into WAFCON that we didn't have the preparation that we needed, and we didn't have the complete roster, that we needed. I just felt like there was a lot of questions left unanswered, and I think our performance there probably showed that, a little bit, and we had to make do with the players we had, and of course, Asisat got injured the very first 20 minutes of the game against South Africa, and that really changed things. And you know, Michelle, we were just converting her to an outside back where she always played up front, and with her club team, and so there was a lot of questions left unanswered. I still thought we could win it. I still felt we had the talent to do it, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. We'd already played South Africa and lost to them in Lagos in the Bashari Cup. So I knew what they had, and I knew what they had committed to it. Um, I didn't really know exactly what to expect from teams like Morocco um, until we got there and I saw them play. And I had seen them in the Bashari Cup too. And to be quite honest, the structure and the way that Morocco was playing, I thought they were playing the best football in Africa in terms of possession, a good specific game model, how they wanted to play, their ability to dominate the ball. They just didn't have the athletes that we had. They didn't have the athletes that that some of the other uh, powerful African nations had. But in terms of playing football, I thought at the time they were playing the best football of any of the teams. So it was definitely a very uncertain period for us.
Oh. And I mean, I remember we Rashidat scored the goal that qualified us for the World Cup, the header
Right,
against Cameroon. So
right,
at least we had achieved that goal, which was like I would say
right.
was the bare minimum that people would expect from the national team.
Sure.
So
Right.
having qualified the team for the World Cup, how did you feel as a coach?
Well, the night we qualified, it was an amazing feeling because here's the difference with Nigeria and the African nations versus the US, say the US who plays in CONCACAF. everything for the US is all about the World Cup. It's not about winning CONCACAF. It's not about being the CONCACAF champions. They want to be that, but if they're not that, it doesn't matter. It's not a deflating, it's not a demoralizing. Like everything is focused to the World Cup and winning at that level. And it probably was WAFCON that really hit home how important the African Cup of Nations is to the people of Nigeria and everybody else. Because my feeling going into it was the objective was to qualify for the World Cup. And so the night it happened, I was elated, on cloud nine. We're not going to have to go to a play-in game. We've qualified. Like that's the objective. And it wasn't until after, we got eliminated that you realize the people in Africa almost seem to put more weight in winning AFCON than they do the World Cup. And I know that's not true, but it feels that way, like
Yeah.
it was it was a period of when things went really bad for me as the coach for not winning, the African Cup of Nations. And the thing I would say is that it's a little bit naive, I think, on for the public that's not in it every day, in training and knowing what's going on behind the scenes, that it's easy to say, we're disappointed we didn't win, right? And this coach is not good because we didn't win. We always win. But I think what's going on now, in my opinion, in Africa, is it's going to be very difficult to continue winning if the federation doesn't start to support things better. Because when you go to Morocco and you look at their national training center,
Yeah.
it's one of the best in the world. And I've been everywhere in the world except the new one at St. James, which I know is amazing, in England. But even with what the US has, what Morocco has, it's it's immaculate, it's pristine. They have everything you can think of there. So they've invested in their football immensely. And you see that with what happened with their men's team in the last World Cup
Yep.
and with the women teams qualifying and with how they've grown over the last 4 or 5 years. South Africa's investing more. Um, um, the Ivory Coast just picked up Pedro, the coach that was at Morocco originally.
Yeah.
And, of course, Morocco has the Spanish, championship coach now. So if Nigeria, to me, the thing that I think they should worry about is they almost feel like it's a birthright that they should just win it because you've won it so much. And it's not gonna continue that way. And there's gonna come a day they're not even gonna qualify for the World Cup if they're not careful because the other African countries are starting to invest more and put more into it. And eventually it's going to catch up, with Nigeria. So that would be my concern moving forward with for Nigeria is that too many people just think it's going to happen because you're Nigeria, and it's not that way anymore. I mean, there are too many good countries in Africa that are starting to invest. So I really got how important winning the African Cup of Nations was though after that event. And that's when there was a period of 4 or 5 months, 6 months after that where, I took a lot of heat in the media and it,
Yeah.
it wasn't it wasn't pretty. And but what I did is I always tried to stay professional and keep what was going on behind the scenes, private between the myself, the team, and the
Yeah.
federation. And that's why I had gotten to a point, before the World Cup that it was just too much, that I had to speak out a little bit. But it was really, difficult. What a lot of people probably don't realize is, when we played Morocco in the semifinal game, um, I thought the first 10 minutes of that game, Morocco were on top of us. After about 10 minutes, we settled down and we controlled the rest of the half. So going in at halftime, I felt really good about it, even with 45,000 Moroccans sitting in the stands, right? Where you couldn't hear anything and they're flashing the laser lights, in our players' eyes and things. But I felt we were in a good spot coming out of halftime. And then we got the two red cards, which were very questionable to me to be straight red cards for stepping on somebody's foot in a tackle. But at any rate, it is what it is. And I thought, quite honestly, we had 30 minutes to go when the second player, when Rash and Halamatu was first, I think, and then
Yeah.
Rash. And after Rash went out, we still had 30 minutes to get through, just to get to extra time. And we had scored when we were one player down,
Yeah.
but then they came right back and equalized. And then we got the second player down. So I'm trying to organize the players on the field to get us through 30 minutes till we could get to extra time. And, I was trying to make some subs. And it was, unfortunately, this is where I had my falling out with the Nigerian staff, is I had some issues on the bench with some of that staff. People don't know this. And, there was some insubordination with some subs I wanted to make and some things that he felt, we should go a different route. And so there was a lot of chaos going on the bench. And but I finally got the subs in that I wanted, the subs that we made. And quite frankly, I think it was one of the best coaching jobs we did, because we made it through with the adjustments and the subs that I made. We made it through 30 minutes of regulation, and then we made it through 30 more minutes of extra time. We played an hour, two players short. That's unheard of, for the men, for a men's team, for a women's team. I don't know how many teams can do that for an hour, and in a major event with so much riding on the line, and just to get to penalties, right? So even though after the game and we lost in penalties, even though I was really disappointed that we weren't going to be playing for the championship, I was also really proud of the team because and I don't know if you remember, but Monday Gift hit the crossbar with
I
about three
remember.
minutes left,
Yeah.
and we could have won it, right? But I felt like they just did an amazing job of leaving everything on the field for an hour, playing two players short.
Right.
And I felt the adjustments were good. And, after the game, the players were in the locker room, but I had gotten on to the staff for the insubordination that was going on in the locker room. And we had some real issues. And some, between you and I, there should have been some coaching changes made at that point. And unfortunately, the Federation wouldn't support me on it. But I've never in 30 years of coaching had any kind of subordination like we had that night. Um, and then what a lot of people don't realize is, the next 2 or 3 days after that match, when we really needed to be out with recovery training and taking care of our bodies and preparing for the third place match against Zambia, our players were boycotting. They sat in the hotel room for the next 2 or 3 days because they hadn't been paid. They had some wages. People don't know that, right? And I never brought that up publicly, even after we lost, even after I was taking all these hits. But those girls we didn't do anything after losing to Morocco before we stepped on the field in the third place game against Zambia
Oh,
because of this issue, right? And you and I both know, as a coach, you can't do that. I mean, you have to prepare, and
yeah.
we didn't prepare our minds, our bodies. We didn't prepare with the tactical plans or anything else because they refused to do anything until they got things sorted with the federation. So even in that third place game, I think we probably had 4 or 5 breakaways that we didn't score, and I think Zambia had the one shot and scored, and we lose. And again, um, after the fact is the barrage came at me, and but I just it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was the right time to share all of this,
Oh,
and to throw my employer under the bus or anything else. I was more concerned with we've qualified. Now I've got to get some of these things corrected before the World Cup comes around. So that's where my focus was. And I had to really just kind of stop reading the media and stop, you know, listening to, because I knew what was going on the inside. And unfortunately, in fairness to the people of Nigeria, they didn't know. So, and the media didn't know everything. And, but it will challenge you as a coach. It will test you, and when you've got a whole country that's kind of asking questions. It was difficult, but the good news is I still knew we had the players. I knew if we were giving enough, um, that we could still make a really good showing in the World Cup.
Perspective, I mean,
Yeah.
I definitely remember when a lot of people in the media were coming for you.
Hmm.
I cannot imagine that it
Yeah.
can be easy to deal with, but I
Yeah.
mean, you got through it. And
Got
then
through it.
let's move forward now, talking about the
Yep.
2023 Women's World Cup.
Yep.
So, like you mentioned, the WAFCON is so important to us. And some might say the reason why the WAFCON is as important as it is because we never really make a mark at the World Cup. So
Right.
people look at it that, okay, we just go to the World Cup, we lose, we come back home. So at
Yeah.
least let's win the continental competition.
Sure.
Knowing that, what was your mindset like going into the tournament? Did you feel like we were just going to take part, or did you feel like we could really, leave our names and our mark at the World Cup?
No, I really felt like we could leave our mark. And I'm saying that based on the talent that we had in the team. I felt like a couple of things. If I could have the time to put the group I wanted together, you know, that we could make a mark. Because if you remember, in both times, or all three times, I think we played the US, they were 2-0, 2-1 games. We were respectable.
Yeah.
Even when we went up to Canada, we were having our issues with some off the field stuff internally. But when it came to performing, we lost 2-0, but we drew 2-2 up in Canada. So I knew the talent was there to play against the best teams in the world. My biggest fear going in was that we would continue not getting all the players into the camps. Um, I was still concerned about staffing because they had dismissed, Lauren from my staff, and I wasn't completely happy with the Nigerian staff after what had happened at AFCON, and so we had a lot of things that we needed to settle and solve. But I always believed in the players. I felt like if we could get this group together, and I at one time could finally get my group together, that we could make a mark on it. Now I'll also have to flip that and tell you this was all leading up to the World Cup that I was feeling this way. Now, I got really concerned when we canceled our training camp. We were supposed to train in Nigeria 5 weeks before we went to Australia. We were going to do 3 weeks in Nigeria, and then we were going to go for 2 weeks to Australia. That was the plan. For whatever reason, that plan changed. I don't know. I don't know the reasons behind it. I'm sure it was financial reasons, but they canceled the 3 weeks in Nigeria. And then we canceled the 2 weeks in Australia. So ultimately, what we ended up with was only going to be 10 days in Australia to prepare for the World Cup. So, with that in mind, I have to be honest with you and tell you I was very concerned then because of our group. We were the group of death. I mean, we had the defending gold medalist, the Olympic gold medalist. We had the host nation that was number 10 in the world, and then Ireland that was an up and coming, nation. And I really was afraid that with only 10 days of preparation, and mind you, all of those teams were already, they'd been 6 weeks in camp, with their national teams playing exhibitions against top competition, other national teams. We were going to have 10 days, and then we only played a local team in Australia, a club team that we got nothing out of. We win by 8 or 9 goals and we get nothing out of the game. So I was, at that point, even as good as our players were, I was really worried because I know how good those teams are. So I would have to be honest with you and tell you, as good as I felt about what we could do at the World Cup leading up to several months before, then when we canceled our camp, our training camp, and I found out we were only going to have 10 days, I probably felt equally as concerned that we could make a good showing, not based on talent, just based on not having the time to be prepared. So really, quite frankly, what I did in those 10 days to get ready is I knew in 10 days, I've done this long enough that I knew we weren't not going to play this beautiful possession based brand of football against those teams. Canada, as you well know, is very, very good as a possessional based team. So we knew Canada was going to have the ball. Like 70-80% of the time they were going to have the ball. So I worked very hard over those 10 days just on organizing a good defensive block, a good defensive structure. And we worked on where on the field we wanted to start that pressure, how high up or how low we wanted to play. And then we worked only on counter attacking out of that. Once we won it, how can we break quick and go? Because I just knew we weren't going to have the ball, and there was no point trying to work on this pretty brand of build up and get ourselves too open where
Mm.
they would just play right through us. And I think at the end of the day, it was the right decision. It's interesting. I'll tell you this a little bit. We put all of our emphasis on that 10 days on Canada, even though on the back room, myself and Kyle, who I was kind of using as my lead assistant then, he had just come on board, but during the World Cup, but we were working on, along with Ebo, our video analyst guy, the three of us, we were working on Australia and Ireland as well. But with the team, that 10 days, we only focused on Canada because I really felt like we had to get, going into the World Cup, I felt like we had to get at least a point out of Canada. I did not know, and I felt it was going to be very difficult to get any points out of Australia, the host nation, number 10 in the world, and they were playing at a really high level. They had just got through beating, I think, the beating England right before they came. They had played the US really well. Like they were really in peak form.
Yeah.
So I didn't think we were going to get anything out of the Australia game. And then I felt like we could beat Ireland and get something. So I felt like if we could get 3 points with Ireland and get a point out of Canada, that 4 points might get us through. If anything else happened in Australia, great, right?
Right.
It'd be icing on the cake. So with the players, that 10 days, we just focused on Canada. And then fortunately, we got the point, and Chimaka made a huge save on Sinclair's penalty. Of you probably couldn't write a better story because there's the world's all-time greatest goal scorer in the history of women's football, and she's stepping up to make history, scoring, I think, in her fifth or sixth World Cup if she would have scored a goal
Yeah.
against us. And then you got the young upcoming, future star goalkeeper, on the women's world stage, and Chimaka comes up big. And so we get the point, and I was ecstatic that we got a point because it was one of those that if it went south quick, if they would have scored early, it was one of those games that you might end up losing 3 or 4 goals. You're
Right.
right, and so the longer the game went, the more we started building a little bit of confidence and started to play a little bit better and got a little bit better and a little bit better. But we didn't create a lot in that game. I think we had 3 or 4 decent looks, but then when we got ready for Australia, we did the same thing. We just continued to work more on this block and more on our countering. And then we tried to exploit in our counterattacks. We really tried to focus on exploiting the flank areas because they really would send those two outside backs really high. And they had a ton of speed up front. So we dropped our block even a little lower so that we wouldn't give up space behind us. And I think it worked, perfectly. And you know, you a huge moment in the World Cup really was we conceded right at the end of the half against Australia, and now we're playing extra time, and then Tony Payne wins a ball in midfield, and well, I think Ashley actually wins the header, and Payne picks it up and plays to Rash, and Rash gets the cross in, and
Yeah.
Kanu gets the goal, and
Yeah.
so that to me was the turning point for us because we got now going to halftime not just conceding late, but we've scored late, and
Yeah.
we knew it was going to be demoralizing to them. And so, we go in even, and I think that was a huge confidence boost for the team. And then, getting, I mean, off a set piece, we get the second goal to go up, and then, 20 minutes left, all of a sudden, Payne plays Aussie Sod in, and she scores from an incredible angle. And, I can remember looking at Kyle with about 18 minutes left, and I'm going, what's going on? Like, can you believe? I mean, we're up 3-1 in this game, and and we wrote it out. I mean, it was 11 minutes of extra time in that match. I don't know if you remember, but we were
I
up
remember.
3-1 with 11 minutes and we were just hanging on. They were throwing everything at us. And, you know, if they would have scored early with 11 minutes left, they may have come back and tied the game. But luckily, their second goal came with only about a minute of that
Yeah,
11 minutes left, and we were able to hang on. So now all of a sudden, we're at the top of the group, right? I mean, we're right there. We can win the group now with the win against Ireland. But as a coach, you had to be careful in the Ireland game because uh, the other match, Australia and Canada, was being played at the same time. So the points were and the goal difference were set up in a way that if we lost the match against Ireland, we could be completely out based on the results of the other game. But if we beat them, then we knew we won the group. But at the same time, depending on the other game, like a tie would get you in. Like,
yeah,
and so we're monitoring the other game as we're playing ours. So we had to still be, as a coach, you still have to play with some caution because you can't lose it. We know we can't lose the game. We need to win or we need to draw to advance. And so it was a typical, to me, one of those kind of games where that's what you're playing for, right? To just get some kind of point to advance. And, Ossisot had a really good chance in the first half, I think. I think we had maybe one or two in the second half. They had a couple of chances. It was one of those that you end 0-0, and probably the way the game went, a draw was probably a fair result in that game. So now we're through, and I mean, honestly, I couldn't believe it because not only were we through, but we hadn't lost a game. We had two shutouts, two clean sheets.
yeah,
We'd beaten the host nation. I mean, there was so much to build on. And so then we go into the England game. And I think the thought there was this: we had watched England play China in the last group game, and China set in a low block and
oh,
tried to defend, and England just walked right through them. They won that game like 6-0. And so I made the decision that, you know what? We're in the knockout stage. You're playing the European champions. Let's go for it. Like, if we lose, we lose, but let's unleash the players and let them go attack and let's get after them. So we decided, instead of sitting in that defensive block the way we had for 3 games,
yeah,
is they were going to play with 3 backs. So we said, let's let our 3 forwards just press their 3 backs. Let our 2 attacking mids eliminate their 2 holding mids, because those back 3 players and their 2 holding mids were the key to everything. They were really good up front, if you remember, with James up front
yeah.
and Hemp and
Russo.
Russo, and those kids up front were very good and were scoring a lot of goals in the World Cup. But I felt like if we could deny service into those players, if we could cut off the head, of cutting the backs and those 2 holding mids, those 3 couldn't get the kind of service that they would want to be dangerous to us. So we spent that week just working on now pressing and going after, getting after them. And honestly, it was the perfect game plan. I mean, if you remember, we jumped all over them. I think we outshot them 20-12 in the game. It was the one time, if you were ever going to beat England, that was the night to do it. And I'm super super proud of the team and the players and what they did. The only thing that came back and bit us a little bit is, they lost James to an ejection right
Yeah,
at the end of the game. So we had 30 minutes with a player advantage. So you would think and hope we could score a goal in that 30 minutes, and we didn't. In fact, we actually played worse, I think, with 10 players than we
yeah,
did with 11. And where I fault that too is I think that comes back to only having 10 days to prepare, because there's only so much you can cover. And we covered those situations in the classroom. What happens if we're man up? What happens if we're man down? What happens if we're winning with, 15 minutes left? What happens if we're like all those scenarios you go through in the classroom. But in those 10 days, we didn't have time to do it on the field. And that's my only regret, because you could tell we weren't prepared to have the man advantage. They just dropped back and defended deep and got in a block, and we got impatient, and kept hitting long balls, and we didn't handle that situation. So I kind of attribute that to, if we'd have had those 5 or 6 weeks, I think we'd have beat England on that night. And but I go back to it, and for me, I look at the World Cup now and I go, we played 4 games. You played the defending Olympic champions, you played the defending European champions, and in 90 minutes of play, we didn't lose a game, and we had 3 clean sheets against,
Yeah.
and then beat Australia. The only way we were eliminated is in penalties, and that's anybody's game when you get to that point. So extremely, extremely proud of the girls. I mean, I couldn't. I and then of course things change back home. Now the media is going, "Hey, Randy, you should coach the men's team, right? Like he did such a good job there. Let's hire him as the men's coach." And I think the country really got behind and saw really glimpses of what I had been trying to do,
Yeah.
as we built the team. So, um, very fond memories now, and with the fan base now, it's just, I mean, I love the country, and I love that team, and would love to still be there, quite frankly.
No,
Yeah,
yeah. No, that's an amazing recollection of the whole tournament because I know even from my point of view, like I will just say that England game, when the draws were made, some of us were upset because we finished second and now we knew we're going to face England.
yeah,
And it felt like, oh man, we have no chance. Lauren
yeah,
James, Lucy Bronze,
yeah,
Russo. It felt like we
yeah,
have no chance. But I was like,
right,
I was at home. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna watch the game. I'm gonna enjoy it and see what
yeah,
happens. And then the game starts, and in the first 3 matches, like you said, we had been playing more on the back foot. So that's
right,
that's what most of us were expecting. That okay, we'll come, we'll defend,
right.
we'll see if we can hit them on the break. But we come out with this aggression. And it was like a dream to me. I'm like, we are actually outplaying England. Like we
Yes,
actually look like the better side. I remember
yeah,
Ashley hit the crossbar. We had
crossbar.
a
Yeah,
couple opportunities to
yeah,
score, and it
yeah,
was just an amazing game plan. I'll be honest, like that was the game that I mean, just like the way you won most of the Nigerians over, like that was the game that I was like, wow, like this man really has
yeah,
something, like he knows
yeah,
what he's doing. It was incredible. And
yeah,
unfortunately, we just couldn't get that goal. It's football.
yeah,
Some days are like that. And then we
yeah,
lose. We missed our first 2 penalties. Once we missed the first 2 penalties, I'm like, oh yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
was a little bit too good to be true.
That's right.
But
Yeah,
this was also the first time. I mean, I'm only in my 20s, but this was the first time that as a Nigerian fan, I had seen the team lose, get knocked out of a competition. But the country, the fans, the media, everyone is like so happy and so
yeah,
proud.
yeah.
Throughout the tournament, it was the most organized I had ever seen the Nigerian national team play.
Yeah.
Everyone
Well,
seemed
thank
to
you.
know what they were doing. We only considered 2 goals in 4 games. It was
That's right.
incredible. It was,
Right.
I mean, some people might look at it and say, oh, but we got knocked out in round of 16. Because our best finish ever is in the quarterfinal. But that was at the
Right.
time we're getting out of the group took you straight to the quarters. So
That's
it
right.
wasn't
Yeah.
it wasn't it
Yeah.
wasn't exactly the same scenario. I was
Right.
honestly so impressed with how we performed in that
Yeah.
tournament, and it really got us excited.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. After the game, I'm speaking to Rachel Daly, because I had her with me at the dash,
Right.
and she came up to me after the game and she said, "Coach," she said, you guys, you just outcoached us here today. She said, we spent all week working against a low block. We were expecting you to go back. And she said, you guys, you had us on the ropes the whole day. We were not prepared for this at all. And I was very appreciative of it. And again, disappointed that we didn't win, because you never know what will happen after that. I would have liked our matchup against Colombia in the next game, and who knows, we might have been able to get to the final four, if we got through that England game. But again, just so proud of the performance, and I was very, very appreciative of the fan base, as you mentioned, the comments and all the nice things that the media said, and all that. I really appreciated, because I felt personally it was kind of like, for the first time, I'm getting to show you what our
What
progress
exactly?
looks like and where we
Yeah.
can go, and that we can compete, not only be 30 or 35 in the FIFA rankings, but we can be a top 10 team in the
Exactly.
world, and build on this and keep going, because there's still really good young players coming up through the pipeline, that we still have enough mix of that core of the team that we should be really good for the next cycle in the World Cup if we could keep it going. Yeah,
Mm. I want to ask you very quickly about two players. You called Jennifer Echegini and Deborah Abiodun for the World Cup.
yeah,
These were two college players. I
right,
remember I had a conversation with Jennifer after the World Cup, and she told me she's like she was working a job as a waitress, her after school job, when she found out that she had been called up to the World Cup, and she's like she had to go meet her boss and be like, I guess I'm going to the World Cup. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. How do you have the, should I say, the guts? Because it's not everyone that would be able to say, you know what, I'm going to pick two college kids. I know they haven't
right,
played at the pro level, but I'm going to trust them to play a role for me at the World Cup. How did you have so
yeah.
much confidence in those players to do that?
Well, I've always had a real clear picture in my mind of how I want to play and what I think the game should look like. Now, I will say I still haven't gotten Nigeria to the point of the way I want it to look, but it's closer to the way we were playing against England to the way I want it to look, because I
All right.
think that's culturally what can be very successful at Nigeria. Um, so I never before I left got them to that point, but I've always had a clear picture of what it should look like, and what kind of players it takes to make it work. And I just felt with Deborah, obviously watching her with the U20s, and I went to a couple of their training sessions and saw her and her work ethic and those things. And there was two or three really good players on that U20 team as well, that I probably would have called up a couple of more if we wouldn't have had the depth in their positions. But Deborah was a position in need. I just feel like controlling the midfield is such a big part, of winning games at this level. And I felt she could do it. Jennifer, I saw for a year straight because she was in the college system, and they play in the same conference that we play. So I see her every week, right? And I know what she can do. I've seen her play up front, out wide. I've seen her play in a 10 position, more in midfield. And so I knew even more what Jennifer could do, having seen her week in and week out. But I think if you remember, I took some heat because I didn't take a Kobe,
Right.
and I took Deborah instead. And that, was before the World Cup. So I took some heat for that. And listen, I think Kobe is a fantastic player. Um, if I could have taken one more, or if anybody would have dropped, I would have brought her into the team, because I think she adds a lot of attacking qualities, and she has some strengths that fits the way I would want to play. So that one was a very, very hard decision for me. But I felt, number one, defensively, um, Deborah was better, and she was younger, and I knew we'd get more work and more legs, and more box to box out of her than
Right.
than we would. And so it was a really difficult decision, having to let Akobe know that. And yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of people that didn't understand it at the time, but I think as soon as Canada, the game happened, people changed their mind about Deborah right off the bat. I mean, it was like, yeah, I think a lot of the Nigerians were calling her the Nigerian Conte. I
Yeah.
saw a lot
Yeah.
of those comments, and so I think once she played with the senior team at the World Cup, the fans saw real quick. Okay, I see what Randy sees in her, right? And so that she really helped kind of stamp and justify that move. But I just had confidence in those two young players. Plus, you're trying to win at the World Cup, but then you're also always looking ahead to the future, and knowing that you've got the Olympics coming up and everything else. Is when you think you have a young player that's ready, a lot of times it's better to take a younger player that you think is ready than to maybe take an older player that may be sitting on the bench for you, because that might bring some other problems, some unhappiness, or something that'll affect team chemistry or that kind of thing. Because when you're used to playing, a couple of World Cups, and then all of a sudden you get put on a bench for a World Cup, then it changes. So you have to be careful in building the roster from that standpoint too.
No, and it's interesting you mentioned that because for a lot of fans, for people in the media, we don't necessarily think about these intricacies about the chemistry, how would the players feel sitting on the bench. All
Yeah,
people thought about was Okobi has won 4 WAFCONs. She's been a key player on the team. She has,
yeah,
everyone just thought like,
right,
why would she not be there? But the way you
right.
explain it now, it makes sense. I know even she was very upset at the fact she was upset at
Yes,
you for not taking her.
yes,
But
yes,
I'm happy to be able to hear your thought process behind that now.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I have to ask you about this. Before the World Cup was when you made the comments and you kind of talked
yeah,
about the things, the struggles that were happening with the
right.
NFF and everything. Surely you knew that you were going to cause a bit of a stir and people were gonna talk about it.
Yeah,
The NFF communications director even came out and released a statement, essentially even insulting you in the statement as well,
yeah,
before
yeah.
going to the World Cup. As a coach, I know you're a very experienced coach, you're an older guy, so you've been through a lot in your time. But how is it like going into a tournament knowing that your employers essentially just insulted you and threw you under the bus?
Well, and I brought that on because I said the things I said publicly, so they were responding to what I said. Now, um, being called Mr. Blabbermouth and everything else, wasn't great to hear that your employers are saying, or being the worst coach ever in Africa or whatever. What all the things they said, but what I felt like going into it was this, and this is where a lot of people don't know the backstory, right? But I mentioned they had released Lauren after
Right.
AFCON, and she was my right hand go to, assistant. So all after AFCON, up until the World Cup, I was fighting to get her back. I was also being fought to put a player on the roster that I'd never seen, and I wasn't going to do that. Like, it's a World Cup, right? Like, you have to pick your roster, right? And so there were a couple of things kind of going on behind the scenes there that we were having some disagreement on, and then to add to that, they canceled the camp, and now all of a sudden we've only got 10 days. And I finally, after 3 years of this kind of continued, these issues being continual, I finally went into this and just said, you know what? If they want to let me go before the World Cup after I say these, then they can. Like, it's as badly as I want to go to a World Cup, my reputation and the way I expect to be treated is more important to me than coaching in a World Cup. Although that's every coach's dream, to coach in a World Cup. So I just made the decision. I said, look, if we go to the World Cup and because we weren't prepared, if we lose 4 goals against Canada and 4 or 5 goals against Australia and we don't get out of the group, it's not going to fall on the Federation, you know, it's going to fall on Randy. Like, and I'd been taking that abuse for 3 years, where I'd never
Right.
spoken out. I'd always protected the NFF. And if I told you some of the things we went through over those 3 years, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, it's shocking of some of the things. So I finally just got to a point of saying, well, if I'm going to go and we're going to be unprepared, then I'm going to at least let the people know why we're unprepared, and I said, and then the other thing is, the flip side of it is, it almost was a bonding, even a stronger bond with the team because they were fighting for their back pay at the time.
Right.
And so it was one of those things that, honestly, once we got to Australia, the first day we had a meeting about it. And I explained to them why I came out to the media the way I did. And I said it was to protect you. And it was also, to get the people to understand what you guys are going through, what we are going through as we head into the biggest event in our sport, on the biggest stage in the world. And then they were already fighting with FIFA to get their money back. So it almost even, we'd always been close, but it almost even made that stronger. It was kind of like us against everybody else. Is
Right.
like that 10 day of training camp was the chemistry was fantastic. The solidarity between the players and myself, And Kyle was almost like we're all fighting for each other, and that's all that matters. Like we don't care because we're not getting help from this group. We're not getting help from this group. Nobody cares about us with this group, but we all care. So it really strengthened the bond, even though things were being said, from the media and the federation that didn't come out that, that you'd normally think wouldn't help your cause. I think in a lot of ways it actually bonded the team together. And that's one thing I think, and I would hope they would always say is that when I came in, I fought for them every step of the way to get the things that they needed. And that's all we really asked for, is just like I know we didn't have the financial resources to have everything that England has or everything the US has. I understand that. I've been in the game long enough to understand that. But at least give us proper camps to train and prepare. At
The
least
bare minimum.
travel, yes, at least travel, a couple of days in advance of a major competition. I mean, people don't realize, but even to get to AFCON, we had to beat Ghana in a home and away and Ivory
Yeah.
Coast, which are two of the best African countries, to
Right.
even get to WAFCON, right? And we'd beaten Ghana at home, and then we had to, go handle our business on the road. Well, we traveled at 5 a.m. the morning before we played Ghana. So that
Wow.
means we're at the airport at 2:30 in the morning. We're traveling. The kids are up all night long. They're traveling. And then we play a game that afternoon at 4:30. Like who does that? Right. And of course we go down there and we lose that game. Um, but luckily we only lose by one. So we had them on the goal differential. And so just those kind of things. I mean, there's certain things that I'm not, I know we're not going to fly first class everywhere. And I know we're not going to, have the resources at some of the teams, but at least give us the bare minimum of preparing the best way we can because we're capable of doing that in Nigeria. Right. And so those were, I mean, there were, again, it's a whole nother story to talk about all the things that we went through over those 3 years. But needless to say, I think this special group of young women really put it together at the right time and on the biggest stage.
So
Yeah,
yeah, and I will say this quickly. Like for someone like myself, I was very happy when you spoke up, honestly. Even though I knew it was gonna come with a lot of maybe noise in the media, but like I've been someone who has been advocating for the players for such a long time. So I was like, these are the things that they are not able to say because we've seen what has happened to players who have spoken out in the past.
that's right.
And for the coach to come out and make the statements, it gave everyone just like a picture of this is what is going on, and you guys get to understand. Because, like you mentioned, if results go bad, players and the coaches are the ones that take the blame. No one ever thinks to mention the federation. Um,
Right.
so that was a good thing. But after that happened, we then go to the World Cup. We have the good performance that we have. Leading up to the Olympics, did you see the changes that you were hoping to see?
No, if I'm being honest, no, not really. I mean, we did get to go to Spain ahead of the Olympics for a training camp. I think we were there maybe 10 days, which was good. I mean, so that part of it was good, but we still ran into a lot of the same issues. I mean, we were, gosh, we were there in Spain almost the whole time, and even into the first match of the Olympics, where the kids still hadn't gotten any of their Olympic gear, training gear, anything else. Other countries were walking around town, walking around the hotel and everything else. They got all their Olympic gear on, and we're wearing old practice gear. We don't ours. Who knows where it was, but we kept fighting to get it and fighting to get it. And Kyle and I had to go out before the opening game against Brazil. And we had to buy our own shirt to
Wow.
wear to the match because we didn't have the gear that they wanted us wearing, right? Because we weren't allowed to wear gear with the Nigeria logo on it, right? So in the Olympics, so and I know those are little things, but they're big things that add up to the players. The way the way you feel, the way you feel better when you have the gear, because after all, it's the Olympics, right?
Right.
Leading up to it, we did the same thing when we had to fly to Cameroon. Um, we flew the night before, through the night. and played. And honestly, if Cameroon would have been smart when we played them, if they would have just come at us, we would have had a hard time getting a result there in Cameroon because our kids were just physically beat, flying all night, sleeping in during the morning and then playing the game that night. It was just, they were lethargic. Luckily for us, tactically, I think Cameroon made a mistake and they set back and they let us come at them a little bit. So we drew that game and should have won it, but we drew it. I'm convinced if they would have been smart and kind of followed, hey, they didn't fly in, they flew in the middle of the night. Like they're gonna like we're home, let's jump on them. I think they could have given us fits, at that point in time. So yeah, there's still some things that we didn't do right, even for the Olympics. I had hoped it would get better, but I mentioned at the very beginning of this show with you that I felt like I could bring some organization and some administrative things, and quite frankly, I just felt like they weren't interested in any of that. We never got to sit down and implement any of it. We never really had any pre-planning sessions. Typically, the U.S. their calendar for the next year is already planned out. They know they have this event, this event, this event coming up. So if they're going to be going to play an event in Europe, then the 3 windows before that, they're playing European teams to prepare to play a similar opponent, right? If
Yeah.
they're going to South America, they'll play South American opponents. Us, we were getting ready for the World Cup, which we had all European opponents, and we go to Mexico and we play Mexico and we play Colombia. Now, I was very, very thankful that we got a camp and we got some games, but we weren't going to play anybody at the World Cup that looked like Mexico or that looked like Colombia. We should have been in Europe playing, but we never sat down, myself and the GS or the president in the 4 years. We just never sat down and planned these things out. It just kind of, they happen when they happen. Oh, coach, okay, you're going to Japan. We flew to Japan, which is, God, for our kids, it's halfway around the world. It's 16, 20 hours on a plane. We get there, the last players, half the team arrives the first day, the other half arrives the second day. The third day, we're playing Japan, so we don't have any time to train. The players literally get off a plane with just a night's rest, and then they play a game. And then we went home after the game. Like we didn't even use the rest of the window. We had 5 more days, 4 more days that we could have stayed and trained and gotten better to get ready for the World Cup. And for whatever reason, we didn't. So it's just things like that we just didn't do a good job of organizing and planning. And these are the things I had hoped I could bring, because I knew the talent was there. I knew I could take care of the team and get the team playing the way we need to play to be a world power. But I was really hopeful we could change the mindset and the mentality of the way things were being done. But unfortunately, on that, I think with the team we were successful. I think with changing the mindset of the federation, I think that one we didn't achieve the goals with that one.
Oh, okay, okay. And very quickly, in the Olympics, I feel like that tournament, you were a little bit a victim of your own success. The team or the fans, the media, everyone saw how we played in the World Cup against England. And now we face Spain, the best team in the world, and we have a couple chances. We make one error, they beat us 1-0. We play Brazil, similar game, had a couple chances. We make one error, they beat us 1-0. And
Yeah,
everyone is coming at you and saying, why are we not beating Spain? Why are we not beating Brazil? In a way, for me, it was like, wow, so people can actually believe so much that we should be beating these teams.
yeah,
But then no one looked at the context of the fact that we actually had opportunities. The ball just didn't go in. We made an
yeah,
error. So coming out of the tournament, losing the 3 matches, even though we came out a bit more in the third game, a lot of
yeah,
people said we were too passive, we were too defensive, we should have played them out more. Did you feel
yeah.
like they were right, or did you feel like the way we approached the games was right?
Well, I think for the time that we had to prepare for those teams, I think we approached it right because you don't have as you said, there's no margin of error. We concede one goal in each game and you lose, so that margin of error is very, very small at that level. And if you think about it, compared to the World Cup, the Olympics was even a harder draw than the World Cup. I mean, you're playing the world champions. You're playing Brazil, which is, end up being a finalist in the Olympics, right? You're playing Japan, which is world champions in 2015, and they continue to be a world power. So I think with the minimal amount of time that we had to train, just those 8 or 10 days in Spain, we kind of took the approach to not get too open, against Spain. Now we played Brazil in the opening game. I thought that was one that we could get something out of. And if you go back and you watch that game and you look at any of the like Y Scout or any of the analytical programs that are out there, the game was about 50-50 in possession. The game was about equal in opportunities for each team. And I don't know if you remember, but early on, we had a really, really nice set piece, a little short 2-player corner. The ball gets played across the 6 and Tosin flies in there and heads it over the crossbar. Like that one's harder to miss than it is to make, right? So you could be one up in that game as well. I think Chinwendu, missed a really, really good chance in that game early. So I walked out of that game going, it was one that probably could have gone, either way.
Yeah.
Then you got to get a result with Spain, but you full well know that Spain can open you up like nobody else, right? If you get too stretched. So we did take a more conservative approach, kind of like we did in the early games at the World Cup, and sit in a little bit more defensively. But we felt like we could catch them on the break because of our pace up front, and we almost did. We had 3 or 4 really good breakaway
Rash had a
opportunities.
couple good chances. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That we could have been a different story, and they score on probably the one time in all the games Chimaka played where she made an error in judgment on the free kick.
Yeah.
So again, you kind of walk out of there, and as a coach, you go, "Well, the kids played pretty well. I mean, like you're playing the best team in the world." And I guess I walked out of the Olympics looking at it differently than what some fans did. I walked out of the Olympics looking at it in comparison with the World Cup and saying, we have shown the rest of the world that we can play with the very top teams in the world. Like if you're only losing by a goal, and you're only losing by a goal to Brazil, and you've drawn the Olympic gold medalists, you've drawn Australia. I mean, you've beaten Australia. Like to me, it just was even more of a defining statement of saying we can be a top 10 team.
Yeah.
Let's keep moving this forward. Let's don't now take steps backwards and end all of this good work that's gone on in the last 4 or 5 years. Let's take the World Cup and the Olympics and say, hey, if this doesn't give you a window of what we can do on the world stage, then nothing's going to give you a window, because I looked at it as it clearly showed that there's not much difference between us and the top teams in the world. And understanding they're playing year round. They have all the resources. They when opening day of camp starts for them, every one of their players are there opening day. They're not trickling in 2, 3, 4 days later because of visas and lack of organization or whatever. So those are the things that were probably the biggest frustration to me, is if we would just do things, plan ahead, plan to make sure everybody's got a current passport and a current visa, and we know where we're going months in advance, so let's plan. And so yeah, I just think this team could be a top 10 team in the world. I really do. I believe in it, and I believe in those players. um, but I think the federation has to jump on the opportunity. I tried to tell people in Trinidad to do the same thing. The group we had was kind of the golden age. It was kind of like the best collection of the players that had come through this tiny island.
Oh.
But I also had a 10-year plan for them. I said, there's a 12-year-old girl here playing either in Trinidad or in Tobago that could be the next World Cup star, in the next in 2 World Cups. Maybe we're not good enough to win it now, but in 2 World Cups. And that's the way I look at Nigeria, is like we're good enough now to make a deep run in the World Cup. I think we've shown that. We're good enough now to make a deep run in the Olympics. I think that's possible. But if we put this 10-year plan into place where we start organizing uh, better leagues and better organization for our young 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and start, this this plan in place. Well, right now there's probably a 10-year-old, in Nigeria that could be the next Marta, if given the right pathway and the right resources, that
Right.
could win us a World Cup. And when you think about it, it seems like 2 World Cups is a long way off, but it's really not when you start going 4-year cycles. Well,
Mhm.
in 8 years, if somebody were to tell Nigeria today, if you will do this, in 8 years you'll win a World Cup, I would think most people would go, "Gosh, let's do this," right?
Right.
Because 8 years is only 2 World Cup cycles. So why not take in this next 8 years, take what we've built now and build on it to try to keep it going in the right direction, knowing that it may be still, you know, 2 World Cups away before we actually win it. Now, we may win it before that if we kept going with this group, because I think this group is really good. But you're building for long term, year in and year out, being one of the best teams in the world if you plan and structure things in a way that you see the future of the game instead of just, you know, like after the Olympics, the team has been inactive for what? They've missed 2 or 3 windows already. Well, why? Like nobody else is doing that. Like, how are you going to get better if you're missing windows? That's opportunities to be bringing a lot of these young players in and getting a look at them. And so I just think that big, broad vision is not there the way it should be. And that's for me, my wish for Nigeria moving forward is I would love to see them become a top 10 world power, because I think it's very, very close right now. And I think if they could just see it and invest in it, and not saying my plan is the only plan, but at least it would give them a blueprint of some things we could do that I think would effectively help the player development side tremendously, and the coaching development, and learning how to be a team manager and learning how to be an equipment manager, and like all aspects of the organization. You need to train people how to do those jobs properly, and right now that's not being done. So I hope someday that will happen.
No, I hope so too as well. As a Nigerian in general, as a Nigerian football fan as well, it's something that I really hope for. And you mentioned like your plan doesn't have to be the way, but there just has to be a plan.
Right.
Someone has to be thinking about these things.
That's
And
right.
I was gonna ask you about the current state, but it sounds like you follow the team because you're very right in saying we had 2 windows. I remember like I spoke up about this on my platform, kept on talking about why are all the other African nations playing games and our players are just sitting back at home. The players are not happy about it, but they can
No,
only say so much because if they do, there's repercussions that
that's
come
right.
with it. And
That's
then
right.
even in the last window, they finally give us 2 games. We end up playing only one of the games out of the
Right.
two, and then it's back to the same thing. The
Yeah.
WAFCON is coming up next month.
Right.
From your point of view now, watching the team, do you think we can win the WAFCON?
I would say it this way: if if he selects the right players, I think the players are good enough on their own that they can win it. I think
Oh,
there's enough talent there, based off of what was built from the World Cup and the Olympics, that those players will find a way to get the result because they're hungry to go regain the title.
right,
I think they can do that in spite of the coaching, because I don't think that's there, and I don't think it's at the level it needs to be
right,
to help you win on the world stage. But I think the players' talent is enough. If the right players are called in, then I think they can. If the wrong mixture of players are called in, then I think it could be a struggle, because I think Morocco is going to be very, very well organized. I think the Ivory Coast with that coach, I think will be very organized as well. And you know, the other teams are always difficult anyway, no matter how good the coaching is or not. Zambia, Cameroon, Ghana, those
South
teams are
Africa.
always, it's Africa, right? They're always wars just because of the
Yeah.
competitiveness between the countries. So, you know, I'm holding out hope for the players that they can get that done. Um, Listen, as I said, I would love to come back and continue the job, but I would only do it if I could pick my staff, you know, my technical staff, and have the right people. There's a saying here in the U.S. is to have successful companies, whether it's a corporation or a company, a business, whether it's a sport team or whatever, you know, you have to get not only the right people on the bus, but you have to get the right people in the right seats on the bus, you know, if
Right.
you want to win. And I think that's what would be key, you know, is like you'd have to have the ability to have the right staff in place. I'm a big believer in having Nigerian local coaches and Nigerians on staff as well, right? Because I think you want to continue to educate and grow the game in Nigeria. So, but I would want to pick those Nigerian coaches as well. I know two or three that would be really good and qualified, and would be a great addition, you know, along with the staff I would bring. But, you know, that's just me. I don't think
Oh,
the
no.
federation has any thought of that, but I would certainly continue to do it if they ever wanted me to do it. But I'd want to
I'm
have my
glad you
staff.
said that. I'm glad you said that because that was a question I was going to ask you, and you already you already
Yeah,
answered that question.
yeah,
But I want to ask you about this because you've kind of mentioned it a couple times now while we're speaking, and you just kind of hinted at it again, talking about if the coach selects the right players, you know, how much influence does the NFF try to have? You mentioned earlier that they try to force a player on you going to
mhm,
the World Cup.
yeah,
A little, you know, from a fan's point of view, whenever we see a team list, this even happens with the Super Eagles.
right,
We're like, how is this guy getting caught up? You know, like someone has to be
yeah.
forcing the coach to select the player. How much influence do they try to have on player selection?
Yeah. Well, and I would say this in fairness to the federation, because I know we've discussed a lot of things here that I felt like they didn't do right. But I will say this in fairness to the federation, they never tried to influence player selection to me, although there were times that I would be told we've you know, I would give the list of who I wanted, and then they would come back to me and say, well, this player can't come in for this reason. So you need to pick somebody else. But they never presented a name. They asked me a few occasions about players that I left off the list, as if maybe, you know, like
Suggest
maybe I should rethink it or whatever. But they never, until right before the World Cup, that was the only time they ever really tried to force a player on me. Um, I can't speak for the men's team, and I can't speak for other coaches before, because I had it in my contract that I would select the team. You know, so so I don't know how it's been with other coaches. That may be happening now. I hear all the rumors, just like you guys do, of, you know, people influence the federation to take people they know, and, you know, all those stories that come with it. But I would have to say, in fairness to the NFF, they never really tried that with me until the World
okay.
Cup.
That
Yeah,
that's refreshing for me to hear because
yeah,
I'm sure a lot of people think like they're on your door knocking, like, no, you have to
yeah,
do this player.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned that sometimes they would say someone cannot come for a certain reason. Were these usually like valid reasons, like, you know, travel documents, injury, or was it like they just don't want the person to come?
Well, this was a learning curve for me. So the best way I can answer that is I've always been having a relationship with my players that I felt like they could tell me anything, right? Now, obviously, when you come in as a national team coach and you're only there, you know, on these windows, I would have players uh, tell the manager, you know, that they couldn't make it, they were injured, you know, or whatever the reason was that they couldn't make it. And obviously, if you have an injured player, you want the player to stay with their club and get healthy, right? You're not going to bring in an injured player if you know about it in advance. So I would always, my first couple of years, I probably took it at face value that what they were telling me was the truth. Now I think in fairness, as I got a little bit more understanding of the culture and what had happened, I do think probably there had been players that claimed they had an injury or claimed, that there was a valid reason why they couldn't come, when in reality they could have. Um, I think part of the reasoning that they maybe do that is because they're not always treated well when they do come. Like they're not getting paid, they're not getting their per diem. A lot of times the players would travel in if they had a snag in their travel itinerary, or sometimes before they could get a new ticket, they would have to spend the night on their own at the airport, waiting on a flight the next day. And like these things, like I said, weren't planned out in advance. So we were always running into these travel issues. So on the one hand, you can kind of see from some players' perspectives that it's like, it's just a friendly game. I'll wait and come in when it's a meaningful game, right? And I'll just tell coach I've got an injury with my club. Um, so I think what you kind of got to do, and what we started doing moving forward when I caught wind that some of that was happening, is just requiring the club, to give you documentation on the injuries and that kind of thing. That's where you got to have a good relationship with the club,
Right.
and where you can pick up the phone and say, hey, we called, so and so in, and she's not coming. Can tell me what's going on here, right? And so, but I think, in fairness to the players too, probably part of the reason that happened is the way they've been treated is it's not always professionally done. You would never have that in the U.S. I mean, it is like, if you get a call up in the U.S., that's everything. Now on the women's side, our men's team's facing a little bit of that right now, but on the women's side, it's like that's such an honor that you would never pass the opportunity. Plus, the fact is, if you miss a window, then whoever they call in might take your job. There's always a threat of
Yeah.
that happening, and but I think that's where you got to build your senior team, your U20s, your U17. You got to build a strong enough core in each of those age groups that you can that you can start to say that, is no matter who you are. Hey, if OC doesn't want to come in a particular camp, then you know what? I'm bringing the next player in, and OC, you may never get called back in again, right? That
Right.
opportunity may be gone for you. But right now there hasn't, and I use OC only as an example. She was
I
never
know.
a problem. She's fantastic. She was never a problem. But but I just use that as an example, and you've got to get it to a point where the players think that way, is like, gosh, no, I can't miss this. This is my opportunity. I might never get called in again. And so once you kind of set an example with that a little bit, the players will fall in line, I think.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one game that I want us to play, and then we'll wrap up this
Okay.
conversation. It's gone on for a while, so thank you to everyone that is still watching and listening to us. Um, this game is word association. So I'm going to mention a player's name, and
Uh-huh.
you just give me a description of the player in one or two words.
Okay.
Okay. Chiamaka Nadozie.
Woo. Comedic, comedian, um, and future star.
Okay. Ashley Plumter.
High intellect, ultimate team player.
Oh. Christy Uchebe.
The Rock.
Oh.
The ball winner, like she brings that to the team.
Okay. Deborah Abiodun.
Box to box. Um, I call her, I don't know how to say it to where the Nigerians will understand, a mini giant. Like she's small, but she
But she's
plays like a giant. Yes.
right. Okay. Jennifer Echegini.
Creative, full of personality,
Oh. Ifeoma Onumonu.
serious,
Oh.
uh, laser focused. She's one of those players that She wants to know everything you want her doing. She wants to know exactly how you want it done.
Wow.
She wants to know exactly what her role is. Like she's laser focused on everything regarding training and games.
Hmm. Asisa to Shwala.
Charismatic, uh, probably say a few. Goal scorer,
Oh,
uh, and a leader. She's got great leadership qualities, and I know she has struggled with her scoring, of late with the national team, but those kind of come in cycles. I think you have to look at the whole picture in her history. Like you're not the 6-time African Footballer of the Year if you don't put the ball in the back of the net. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. And finally, Rashidat Ajibade.
Um, I would call her a true pro,
Oh,
and I would call her great leader as well. She has got the whole package. I think she's going to be one of the best. She is already one of the best young players in the world. I think we're about to find out as she leaves Atletico. I don't know where she's going, but I know personally because of the phone calls I've gotten around the world about her from teams. Um, she's she's going to have choices to play just about anywhere. I think she's a superstar, on the rise, and I would I would build my team around her any day. She would be my first choice. Yeah,
yeah, that's big praise.
yeah.
Big praise. Okay. And finally, let's wrap up today's conversation. Looking back at the job that you did working in Nigeria, coaching these players, is there any way that you would say that the job has changed you as a coach or as a person?
Yeah, I think we always grow. I think I learn so much about your culture. I learn so much about how to manage um, people and players in a different culture. Every country's different. And so I think it clearly changed me there. I think it's given me, you know, 25, 30 new daughters, around the world, people that now I feel like are family, like they're kids of mine. It's just changed me in so many ways. I think obviously it's given me the opportunity to fulfill a lifelong dream of coaching in a World Cup and an Olympics. Not many coaches get that opportunity.
Right.
Um, as much as I think the Federation could have and should have done things differently, I also am very appreciative of them and the opportunity that they gave me. I just, yeah, I don't have enough things to say, that with all the negatives and all the hardships that we had and all the things I've talked about, that if we do this a little bit differently, things would be so much better. I think you always want to push and challenge, whether it's a company that you work for or whether it's a team that you coach. You always want to challenge to be the best, right? And, and that's all I ever tried to do with the Federation, whether they liked the way I did it or they didn't. I always wanted to challenge them to let's not be just African champions. Let's be champions of the world. Let's be the best we can. But like I said, there's was a lot of good times, and they've done a lot. They've given me, a great opportunity to fulfill some dreams that I had in my life and my career. Yeah, it's definitely changed me.
Amazing. And what would you say was your favorite singular moment as coach of Nigeria?
I think the probably the biggest moment was the win against Australia. I think, I mean, I try to reflect back on qualifying and beating Cameroon, and that was really special in its own sense because we'd gotten so close with Trinidad and didn't do it, right? So just to go, gosh, I'm actually going to a World Cup. That was a really special night. But because of everything else that was going on at AFCON at the time, I wasn't able to enjoy it like I wanted to. I think, each of the games in the World Cup held their own special meaning because, you were getting deeper and deeper. And the game against England, obviously, I'll never forget that one. But I think the turning point for everything was really that game against Australia, you know, and it's when I really felt like we had turned the corner and we could play with anybody in the world, right? So just the excitement of that game, especially being in Australia with the packed stadium and, you know, being in a World Cup on that kind of a stage and being able to see our young women perform the way they did. Yeah, I that was probably the highlight.
Wow. Amazing. And my final question for you is, you already mentioned that you would be interested if the Federation would have you back. But as of today, what would you want Nigerian fans to remember about Coach Randy Waldrum? What would be your message and what do you want them to remember about you?
Well, you said something earlier that how you felt like it was one of the most organized teams you'd ever seen in the World Cup and the preparation and then seeing the way we adapted for the game against England. That's what I would want them to think is that we had a really good tactician, a really good coach um, that really helped us turn a corner in the way we can play football on the world stage. But then I'd also hope that people would think that there was a coach that really cared about his players, that was willing to stand up for the players, you know, even at his own expense, you know, but he was willing to always put the team and the players first. I think that's those two things I think it would be the my hope for leaving some kind of a legacy there.
Right. No, amazing. Thank you very much, man. It's been such a great conversation talking to you, learning so much about you and about your time coaching the Super Falcons. I don't get to make the decision, but if I did, honestly, like I would definitely have you back because a lot of the work that you were doing, we got to see, and since you've been out of the team, it kind of looks like we're starting to take steps back when we should be taking
Yeah,
steps forward. I
right.
do hope these things change, but it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm always here anytime.
Thank you very much. And to
Okay.
everyone that has watched us, I hope you've enjoyed hearing from Coach Randy Waldrum. And Coach, we'll be in touch. We'll maybe have a conversation sometime in the future. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and a shout out to all the fans back in Nigeria. And my hope is that you're doing well, and that that you win WAFCON this July.